One other comment I'd make is there are lots of resources noted on the Public Banking Institute website also, and a number of titles there, and also papers that have been written by Ellen Brown and others that provide additional background information. So there's a treasure trove of resources there that are possible too. Do you want to start?
Yes, I think now that I'm back here, because I was running over the first time I talked, there are a couple things I'd like to mention. And we just talked about books, and there was one out, copyrighted in 2014 and 2015 by Harry Dent Jr., and it's called The Demographic Cliff. And in there he has a chapter 4 that deals with the financial picture. And just to give you a little hint, one of his bottom lines is that during the 1920s, when we were running up on the Great Depression, our debt as a nation got to being 1.9 times the gross national product. And it took us that decade of the 30s to work out from underneath that till World War II came along, of course. What he did in his analysis to recently, I think he's using Minneapolis Federal Reserve Bank information from 2013, but he looks at the debt picture, and the public and private debt is about twice as high as the debt was when we got into the Great Depression. And our unfunded entitlements, because there weren't any entitlements back in the 1920s, double that again. So he estimates we now have debt at 8.2 times our annual gross national product. Then he couples that basically with demographics. The generation that's coming after the baby boomers is smaller in size than the baby boomers. So this debt is going to be inherited and dealt with by fewer people. And it has other ripple effects too, but it's a very interesting book. You might want to take a look at that. Another thing I'd like to share before the final wrap-up, in a conference call yesterday, as a matter of fact, but I think it might have been an earlier one, but people have been talking about the burden our federal government is facing, which is getting shifted down to state and local governments. That the debt leaves our governments with maybe 5 choices as to how to proceed. They can increase the debt ceiling, which they just did, and believe me, we would have seen some international repercussions had that not happened recently, because we were right at the doorstep of some big defaults that would have triggered much worse things. Or it can raise taxes. Not a real good thing to do if you want to keep people working. It can sell its public assets, which a whole group out there would like to see happen. It can fire its employees, or it can cut its services. This is not a happy picture. So I think we've got to fortify ourselves against some of these doom and gloom outlooks that we're seeing, because they're not necessarily just imaginary. But closing comments, I think to get on with our job locally, we really need to complete an analysis of where do our public funds reside right now, what kind of fees for financing and paying interest are our public entities facing, and part of this will help feed into a national study that the Public Banking Institute is doing. And these are things we really need to know before we can move on. And we know that if our public bank deposits can be kept working here at home through our local private lenders, and if our interest and finance costs can become a non-tax revenue source for our local public bodies, we might accomplish much in terms of achieving private and public local goals, and that I think is our motivation here. what we'd ask before you leave today, if you take the time to complete the contact information and indicate the areas of your expertise or interest that was sitting out on the table where the registration was, that would help us. And we really do need help from everybody who is willing to help become an advocate for a public bank study and go from there. We could also use help from persons that specifically have background or information in finance, in law, in accounting, the areas that would help us with such a study. The other thing we'd like to recommend is you take the agenda home because of the links on the back, and if you have filled out an email, we will email you the corrections to the websites that are listed incorrectly on the back of our program today. So I again, thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Vern. And just last words that I'd like to mention too, and I guess it harkens back in part to what I mentioned before about my inspiration of the encyclical from the Pope, but also other readings and just looking for words that compel us to continue doing this work and that give us hope and some guidance about going forward. I think about it's about how do we engage and stay connected with each other. How do we, as we develop and share a common vision, a shared vision for what we want this greater community, this state to be. How do we make space to have the dialogues and seek out the similarities, the shared ideas that we have, the shared parts of the vision that will make a difference for our entire state? Because we have made a difference in the past, our generations before us have, but it's in part through the focus that we can put to really saying we want to make a difference here, we want to wedge an issue, and we've seen it happen before in this state, and I think that we can do that in our community and in our state again. And regardless of whether we have a group of 10 meeting once a month or whether we can grow that to many more people, at least in the banking on central New Mexico, we now have the ripple effect going from what started out as 100 people talking in a five-part lecture series talking about democracy at the crossroads. And you know, the ripple effect continues over the last 4 to 5 years. So we invite you to be a part of this. We invite you to raise your voices, and from your own perspectives, your own workplace, your own place in the community, to join in and find a way that you can participate and help expand the conversation, and we go forward, and we can create our own make this radical vision real, and create greater health and support in our community as well. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today.